Hello, welcome back, boys and girls, to Relax and Read with Mrs. B. Today's story is all about Michelle Obama. Michelle Obama is the wife of Barack Obama, and the story is called Who is Michelle Obama? Written by Megan Stein. Who is Michelle Obama? A tall and beautiful African American woman stood on the lawn behind the White House. She smiled at a group of children and teenagers who had come from nearby schools. It was a warm, sunny day in October. The kids were dressed in t-shirts and jeans. The woman wore a bright blue sweater and black slacks. Grinning, she picked up a hula hoop and began to swivel it around her waist. The crowd watched and someone started counting. 98, 99, 100, 101. She kept going. She reached 142 times before she stopped. She could have kept going longer. I can hula hoop forever, the woman said. She even knew how to swirl two hoops at once. The kids tried to keep up with her. Everybody was having fun, but there was also an important purpose to the fun. Hula hooping was a way to help kids get more exercise and stay healthy. Who was that gorgeous woman performing at the White House? It was Michelle Obama, the First Lady of the United States. And there is Mrs. Obama hula hooping, and the kids are watching. Hula hooping is a really fun activity. Chapter 1. A Close Family. Michelle LaVaughn Robinson was born on January 17, 1964, on the south side of Chicago. Her family lived in a one-bedroom apartment. It was on the second floor of a small house. Michelle's great-aunt lived downstairs. Michelle's parents slept in one room. They divided the other room. One space was a tiny bedroom for Craig, Michelle's brother. He was 2 years older than Michelle. The other space was a tiny bedroom for Michelle. It was as small as a closet. Michelle's parents were strict, but she didn't mind. How could she when she admired them so much? Her father, Fraser Robinson, was a hard worker and a cheerful man. For years, he held a job with the city water plant. He worked his way up from janitor to manager. Fraser's job was tough. It got even harder after he became sick. When Michelle was young, he developed a disease called multiple sclerosis. It affected his spine and muscles. It was hard for him to walk. He had to use crutches or a cane. Sometimes it took Fraser Robinson an hour to get dressed. Still, Fraser never complained. He never skipped work because he didn't feel well. Michelle and Craig never wanted to disappoint their father. If one of them ever misbehaved, Fraser would give them a stare. Then he would say, "I am disappointed." That's all it took. Michelle and Craig would both start crying, even if only one of them had done something wrong. Michelle also looked up to her mother, Marion Robinson. She had been a secretary, but when her children were born, she quit work to stay home with them. Like Fraser, she expected a lot from her children. Good grades, good behavior. She brought home extra workbooks so Michelle could study more in her spare time. And here's the city of Chicago, a picture of the city of Chicago. Marion also taught Michelle and Craig to speak their own minds and stand up for themselves. Make sure you respect your teachers, Marion Robinson said, but don't hesitate to question them. Life at home was simple and happy. The family always ate dinner together. At night, they played board games such as Monopoly and chess. Michelle always wanted to win. Craig had to let her win sometimes or else she'd quit. Then he wouldn't have anyone to play with. Michelle and Craig were allowed only 1 hour of television each night. They had pizza only once or twice a year, but they always felt cherished and loved and knew their parents believed they were capable of anything. On Sunday nights, the family visited Michelle's grandparents who lived nearby. But when Michelle was 10, her grandparents moved back to South Carolina. Her grandfather had grown up there. After that, Michelle and her family drove to South Carolina each summer. Many of Michelle's aunts, uncles, and cousins also lived there. Her visits were fun and carefree. And look at the entire family. Michelle didn't know then that her family and South Carolina had a dark past: slavery. Michelle's great-great-grandfather had been a slave in South Carolina. He lived in an area called Georgetown. Georgetown was part of the low country of South Carolina. It was wet, soggy land near the ocean, perfect for growing rice. But growing rice was very hard work. It took more slaves to plant and harvest rice than any other crop. Michelle Obama's great-great-grandfather was named Jim Robinson. He worked on a plantation called Friend Field. At one time, Friend Field had as many as 500 slaves. The plantation owner's family lived in a big fancy white house. Jim Robinson lived in a small slave cabin on a street called Slave Street. Jim Robinson never learned to read or write, not even when he became a free man after the Civil War ended. But his second son, Fraser, Michelle's great-grandfather, learned how. Fraser worked doing house chores for a white family named Nesmith. The Nesmiths had several young daughters. Fraser saw how important learning was in the Nesmith house. He watched as the Nesmiths pushed their daughters to do well in school. Pretty soon, Fraser decided he wanted to learn how to read too. He was so determined, his relatives say he taught himself. From early on, the Robinson family always valued education. Fraser Sr. taught his son to study hard and learn as much as possible. In turn, Fraser Jr. taught Michelle's father, Fraser III, the same thing. Michelle didn't know any of this family history when she visited Georgetown as a child. All she knew was that she was surrounded by people who believed in hard work and education. That's what it took to succeed and have a good life. Chapter 2, Making the Grades. It was a Robinson family tradition to skip second grade. Both of Michelle's parents had skipped second grade, so had her brother Craig. Michelle worked as hard as they had, so she skipped second grade too. At Bryn Mawr Public Elementary School, Michelle got all A's, but one teacher complained about Michelle to her mother. She said Michelle had a temper. Her mother just laughed. "Yeah, she's got a temper," Marion Robinson said, "but we decided to keep her anyway." When Michelle reached sixth grade, she was chosen for a gifted program. It meant she could take some classes at a nearby college. She studied biology. She even learned how to dissect a rat. She also started learning French that year. After school, Michelle took her piano lessons from her great aunt who lived downstairs. She practiced her piano lessons without even being reminded. Her mother said she would practice the piano for so long you would have to tell her to stop. There's Michelle on the piano. When Michelle graduated from Bryn Mawr Public School, she was a top student. She wondered, should she go to the nearby high school or was there a better choice? Michelle and her parents talked it over. A new magnet school had opened in Chicago. A magnet school pulls in good students from all over a city. The school was called Whitney M. Young Magnet High School. It was one of the first in Chicago that tried for an even mix of black and white students. The only problem was that the school was 12 miles away from the Robinsons' house. It took an hour and a half to get there. Michelle would have to take two city buses all by herself. It was the best school, so Michelle decided to go. For the next 4 years, Michelle worked hard. Taking tests sometimes gave her trouble, but that just made Michelle study harder the next time. She got all A's and still had time to take dance lessons. She was a treasurer of the student council. She was in the National Honor Society, a club for excellent students. One of Michelle's friends in high school was Santita Jackson, the daughter of Reverend Jesse Jackson. Jesse Jackson was a famous civil rights leader. He had worked with Martin Luther King Jr. In 1988, he had tried to become the first Black Democratic candidate for president. Of course, the big question in high school was, what about college? Again, Michelle wanted the best. Her brother Craig was already enrolled at Princeton. Michelle wanted to go there too. But Craig was different from Michelle. He was a basketball star. He was also a great student who hardly had to study. Michelle's mother said that Craig could pass a test just by carrying a book under his arm. When Michelle talked about going to Princeton, the counselor at the high school said no. Her test scores weren't high enough. She hadn't played sports. Michelle never took no for an answer, though. She thought about Craig and his study habits. And what do you think she's going to do? She thought to herself, I can do that too. So she applied and was accepted. In the fall of 1981, Michelle arrived at the beautiful campus in Princeton, New Jersey. The college was more than 200 years old. Many of the stone buildings were covered in ivy. Huge leafy trees lined all the walkways. The dorms were charming, old buildings with cozy rooms. The dining halls were incredible. Huge rooms with long tables, arched ceilings, and giant old chandeliers. They looked like scenes from a Harry Potter movie. Right away, Michelle noticed that there weren't many Black people at Princeton. In Chicago, her neighborhood had been almost totally Black. Her high school had been about half Black. At Princeton, most of the students were white and a lot of them were rich. They drove expensive cars, BMWs. She didn't even know grown-ups who owned BMWs. Michelle's room was on the fourth floor of a dorm in a cozy attic with sloped ceilings. One of her roommates was a white girl named Catherine. She was from New Orleans in the Deep South. She seemed nice and friendly. But after a few months, Catherine moved to a different dorm. Years later, Michelle found out why. Catherine's mother had been shocked to learn that her daughter had a Black roommate. She demanded that her daughter's room be changed. What a silly woman. The woman told officials at Princeton, we weren't used to living with Black people. Catherine wasn't the only white student at Princeton who hadn't known African Americans before college. Although the white students were not openly racist, they tended to leave minorities out of their social life. One example was the eating clubs at Princeton, which were like fraternities. Each club had its own beautiful building with a fancy dining hall. The clubs held parties and dances too. Like fraternities, students could only join a club if they were invited. But in 1981, when Michelle was at Princeton, all the eating clubs were almost completely white. Imagine how hurt Michelle must have felt knowing that she and her friends weren't asked to join any clubs because of the color of their skin. Michelle and her friends gathered in the Third World set instead. They could play music there and eat and talk. It became their social club. I love that. Still, Michelle thought that Princeton should try harder to bring Black and white students together. In her last year in college, Michelle wrote a paper about how it felt to be Black at Princeton. It had made her far more aware of blackness than ever before. Sometimes she felt like a visitor on campus. In 1985, Michelle graduated from Princeton with honors. That was proof that she had been a better student than most. Now what? Michelle wasn't sure what to do next, but she knew she wanted to help people. Was law school the answer? Having done so well at Princeton, Michelle was ready to aim even higher. Many people thought Harvard University had the best law school, so of course, that's where Michelle wanted to go. Because you know what? Michelle thought she deserved the best, and she totally does, and so do you. And with her determination, of course, she got it. Chapter 3, Meeting Barack. In the fall of 1985, Michelle entered Harvard Law School. At first, she wasn't sure she liked it. Maybe law school had been a mistake. What mattered most to Michelle was helping people, especially people who couldn't help themselves. So in her spare time, she worked in an office where Harvard Law students gave advice to people who couldn't afford lawyers. In the summer, Michelle worked at a law firm back home in Chicago. The law firm was called Sidley Austin. Michelle's summer job was sort of like a tryout. If she did well, she might be hired for a full-time job after she graduated. Michelle did very well at Sidley. Not surprising. So when she graduated from law school in 1988, Sidley Austin offered her a good job with a high salary. Now at age 24, she was making a lot more money than her father. She needed a good salary to pay off her hefty student loans from Princeton and Harvard. After 7 years away, Michelle was so happy to be back in the city she loved. But what about the work itself? Michelle did legal work for a dinosaur, a famous purple dinosaur named Barney. Michelle's job was to work on contracts for Barney's toys, books, and games. The other lawyer at Sidley thought Michelle was lucky. Her assignment was fun, but Michelle didn't love the work. She wished she could do something to help poor people and maybe even change the world. One day, a new person came to work at Sidley. He was a Harvard Law student, like Michelle had been, and this was his summer job. Michelle was assigned to be his mentor. She would teach him about the law firm. The summer associate was Barack Obama. Michelle's friends at Sidley had seen a picture of Barack. He was tall and had a great smile. He was supposed to be brilliant. Everyone thought Michelle Robinson and Barack Obama would make a good couple. Everyone except Michelle, that is. How would it look if she dated a guy when she was supposed to be teaching him about work? Michelle was perfectly friendly to Barack. She went out to lunch with him, but it was a business lunch, not a date. She talked to him at office parties and gave him a ride home sometimes. She even tried to set him up with her friends. But Barack didn't want to date her friends. He wanted to date Michelle. He kept asking her out. Finally, he wore her down. For their first real date, they went to the movies. After that, they spent a lot of time together. One day, Barack took her to a church basement. He was there to speak at a community meeting. Michelle saw how special he was. Barack was sincere about wanting to help people. She started to fall in love with him right there and then. Michelle grew to like Barack so much that she brought him home to meet her family. That was a big deal for Michelle. She didn't do it too often. Craig felt sorry for Barack. I wonder why. The first time they met, so did her parents. They knew Michelle was very picky. She usually only dated guys for a short time. If they did one thing wrong, she fired them, according to Craig. But a month later, Michelle asked Craig to do her a favor. She wanted Craig to play basketball with Barack, and Craig knew why. Craig and his dad believed that you could tell a lot about a person from the way he played basketball. Did he hug the ball? Was he afraid to shout and miss? Did he show off on the court or lie about being fouled? Craig set up a game at a local school with a lot of his friends. They were all excellent players like Craig. The game was tough and competitive, but Barack played well. He played to win, but he didn't argue about every little thing in the game. He was confident without being cocky, Craig said. After the game, he told Michelle that Barack was a good guy. Great, Michelle thought. There was only one problem. Barack had to go back to Harvard Law at the end of the summer. For the next 2 years, Michelle and Barack saw each other only occasionally. Barack came to Chicago for the summer. Michelle went with him to Hawaii at Christmas to visit his family. She and Barack wrote letters and talked on the phone. How romantic. Then something terrible happened. Michelle's father suddenly died after an operation. No one had expected it. Michelle was devastated. Her father had meant everything to her. Barack flew to Chicago for the funeral. He was at Michelle's side for the saddest period in her life. But would he always be there? Michelle was beginning to ponder or wonder. Barack said it wasn't important to be married. He didn't want to promise anything. All that mattered was their love for each other. Then one night he took Michelle out to dinner. He had finished school. He was a lawyer now. They went to a fancy restaurant to celebrate. At the dinner, they started talking about marriage again. Michelle was getting frustrated because Barack was saying the same old thing. Marriage wasn't important. Then a waiter brought out a special dessert. There on the plate was a box with an engagement ring in it. Barack had been planning to propose all along, so he threw her off in order to surprise her. Okay, so we're going to stop there for today, and we'll continue the upcoming chapters in the next video. Thanks so much for watching. Take care. Bye-bye.